The Lodge, an organization of powerful sorceresses willing to go to any lengths to achieve their goals. To fully understand the Lodge and why it exists, I should first explain the events on Thanedd Isle, and the palace situated there, Garstang, though I'll try not to go into too much detail. During a gathering of sorcerers and sorceresses on Thanedd Isle, things went horribly wrong. Several mages under the banner of Nilfgaard, led by the most powerful sorcerer alive, Vilgefortz, had planned a coup. They were to attack and eliminate the northern mages. The goal, eventually, was to capture Ciri. Nilfgaard, of course, hoped to marry her to Emir, but Vilgefortz wanted to keep her for himself. Regardless, the northern sorceresses realized what was going on far quicker than expected and attempted to stop the Nilfgaardian mages before their plans could complete. Thanedd of Rhys then called for a meeting in a locked tower in the palace of Garstang. They were to talk things out, no doubt. However, at Thannedd's behest, Yennefer brought Ciri into the room. And Ciri, through her elder blood powers, began to tell them of what had happened at the borders of the northern and Nilfgaardian kingdom. War had broken out, Vizimir of Redania was dead, Demavend had attacked Nilfgaard, and things weren't looking good. For entirely unknown reasons, Thanedd of Rhys then removed the blockade that stopped spells from being cast at Garstang, and all hell broke loose. Thanedd realized quickly that the northern mages were correct, that Vilgefortz and Francesca had betrayed them all, but it was too late. Scoia'tael, hidden by Francesca in advance, now poured from the cellars and a massacre ensued. In the end, Thanedd destroyed Garstang entirely and committed suicide not long after the events on Thanedd Isle. Many more mages died that day, not least of all Hen Gedimdaith, one of the first mages to be taught magic by the elves so long ago. He died of a heart attack. Both the Chapter of Sorcerers and the Council of Sorcerers were in shambles, which, for clarification, were a sort of first and second chamber of mages, or the Senate and the House of Representatives. Together they formed the Conclave of Mages, the main governing body for magical practice. 3 of the members of the chapter died during or shortly after the coup, and 2 of them turned out to be Nilfgaardian traitors. 2 of the members of the council died, Philippa took part in the fighting, and Yennefer disappeared, turned into a jade figurine by Francesca Findabair. Needless to say, after Thanedd Isle, the magical community wasn't doing so great. Kings everywhere started mistrusting mages a great deal more. Some of them were exiled. And so it was that Philippa had to come up with a plan. Alongside Margarita Loantil and Triss Marigold, she created the foundations for the Lodge of Sorceresses. On the 5th of August, Philippa, Margarita, and Triss gathered in Monte Calvo, a castle owned by Philippa in the mountains of Redania. Together they summoned projections of several different sorceresses that Philippa intended to invite to their lodge. Outside of the original 3, Kira Metz, Sabrina Glavesig, Sheila de Tanzaville, Francesca Findabair, and Asirava Anahit were invited to this meeting. And initially that went about as well as you'd expect, so soon after the events at Thanedd Isle. Sabrina outright refused to work alongside Francesca, and there was a great deal of distrust toward the Nilfgaardian sorceress as well. Most of them seemed to believe that Asira would not keep the lodge a secret, but instead go straight to Emir with this information. To which Asira replied that if she divulged her participation in a secret magic meeting, she would end up on the scaffold. She didn't know then how right she was. Not only that, but Sabrina also brought up Philippa's relationship with Dijkstra, at which point Sheila intervened and told everyone to shut up so Philippa could at least tell us why they were summoned here today in the first place. Philippa then explained that she decided a lodge was necessary because magic is threatened, as she put it. After the tragic events of Thanedd, she realized that alliances held for years could be reduced to nothing given the right incentive. To make sure nothing crazy like Thanedd Isle ever happens again, Philippa wanted to create a group of sorceresses, the Lodge, to steer the events of the world into the right direction. Rebuilding the chapter and the council destroyed at Thanedd wouldn't suffice. No one is capable of rebuilding both these institutions, and there is no guarantee they will not be infected by the same disease that destroyed the previous one. So the Lodge was meant to be a secret organization that would serve only the affairs of magic, which will do everything in its power to prevent a disaster. For if magic dies, this world will perish, or to quote Philippa directly, "Rebuilding the chapter and council destroyed at Thanedd is not enough. Besides, no one is capable of rebuilding both of these institutions, and there is no guarantee that it will not be infected by the same disease that destroyed the previous one. We propose a completely different, secret organization that will serve only the affairs of magic, which will do everything in its power to prevent a disaster. For if magic dies, this world will perish, just as centuries ago, a world devoid of magic and the progress it brings will plunge into chaos and darkness. It will be drowned in blood and barbarity." The Lodge was to consist of women only. Sabrina noted that smacked of feminist chauvinism, and she accused Philippa of being biased as she recently came out as being at the very least bisexual. But she agreed to the concept anyway as she put it, men are mentally unstable, too sensitive to their emotions, and you cannot count on them in times of crisis. Margarita Loantil chimed in as well, noting that after comparing the results from the students from the girls' school of Aretusa with the boys' school of Ban Art, they found that female magic users simply perform better, as magic requires patience, delicacy, intelligence, common sense, and tenacity. It needs one to bear calmly and humbly their setbacks and failures. Men lose to ambition. They always want what they know is impossible and unattainable, and they do not notice what is possible. Francesca and Sheila thought the entire discussion was a little pointless, though they agreed to joining the women's only club. Though to be fair, no one ever brought up Vilgefortz, a man who was currently the most powerful sorcerer in existence. So after this somewhat empty talk, the discussion changed to the more serious rules. The Lodge's basic premise is to be absolutely apolitical. It would not be guided by the interests of race, kingdoms, kings, and emperors, but the good of magic and its future. However, each sorceress would be free to serve whomever they wished outside of the Lodge, but when convened, they would only discuss the good of magic, nothing else. To accomplish their goals, they would form a lodge of 12 sorceresses, and of course at that moment there were only 8. During their next meeting, this time in person, Asira would bring another Nilfgaardian sorceress, and Francesca would bring 2 more sorceresses as well. Who the 12th sorceress would be, Philippa would reveal during that meeting. And so, 2 weeks later during their physical meeting, Asirva Anahid brought Fringilla Vigo along to join the lodge as well. Francesca brought Ida Emion and Yennefer of Vengerberg. Although Yennefer didn't want to join in the first place, she was forced to comply. Yennefer, of course, was compressed into a tiny jade statue by Francesca during the Thanedd coup. Due to this, she escaped Vilgefortz, though she would have likely been able to do that anyway. But as she suddenly disappeared, everyone also assumed she had sided with Nilfgaard. And Francesca, of course, didn't bother to correct anyone on this mistake, because she wanted Yennefer to join the lodge, as no one knew Ciri like Yennefer did. They wanted to use her to find Ciri. Francesca tried to convince Yennefer that only through the efforts of the lodge could Ciri be saved. Yennefer, of course, was not of the mind to comply, and sought to escape as soon as possible to find Ciri herself. She even told Francesca this much, not that it mattered. Yennefer was already a prisoner since the lodge could not allow her to run wild to save Ciri and seek revenge. Still, Yennefer would seek a way to escape. Needless to say, the lodge wasn't happy to see Yennefer either. They too thought she was an ally of Vilgefortz and Nilfgaard. Not to mention that bringing Ciri to the meeting is what caused the explosion of violence at Thanedd. Strangely enough, they didn't believe her when later she told them Tissaia had ordered her to bring Ciri there, even though Tissaia herself had already confirmed that at Thanedd Isle. Regardless, Philippa knows that Yennefer is their best link to Ciri at that point, and so the second meeting begins. A short discussion ensued on the war, the conflicts at Sodden and Bruges. Ironically, before the Thanedd coup, the Sorceresses had had a hand in orchestrating the border conflicts, although they'd failed in their attempt somewhat due to a killed messenger. They also spoke of overpopulation and famine, as agriculture wasn't keeping up with said overpopulation. Philippa noted that they could not be pulled into politics any longer, as in the grand scheme of things they were insignificant, and the lodge, as she said, was responsible for the future. Francesca then noted that overpopulation was not something the elves ever dealt with, and the discussion they were having did not apply to elves in any way. She was then interrupted by Margarita and Sabrina, who talked again about how magic should be their first priority. Countries and races be damned, magic comes first. And in the current political climate, neither the North nor Nilfgaard would make suitable allies. The North would have the mages fight for them on the battlefield, and after the events on Thanedd, they had lost their status as well. Nilfgaard, on the other hand, would have them bow their necks, ready to serve whenever the Emperor moved a finger. At this point, Philippa interrupted the discussion and told them of the true plan of the Lodge that would solve this issue entirely. To directly influence the doings of the rulers of the North, in secrecy, change the course of history, affect their plans. To which Sheila wondered why it wouldn't be better to simply kill the kings and rule themselves. But mages have sat on the throne before. The only problem was they did not serve magic then. That was their mistake. However, Philippa's plans were much grander than even that. She envisioned a great kingdom of the North, which would arise from today's Kovir, which in power equaled Nilfgaard due to their incredible wealth. She intended to establish this grand northern kingdom by taking the throne of Kovir. And this she would accomplish through the 12th sorceress that was to sit at their table, Ciri. Ciri was to marry Kovir's crown prince, Tancred. The other sorceresses mocked this plan initially, as they didn't realize Philippa was talking about Ciri at first, and it sounded impossible entirely. No king would ever marry a sorceress, it had been a custom for years. Not to mention that most sorceresses were too old to marry a king. They would also have to be able to conceive a child. They would have to be of royal blood. Ciri, of course, fit this description easily, and Philippa, after revealing Ciri's name to the Lodge, mentioned another prophecy that included Ciri, naming her the White Flame of the North, destroyer and rebuilder, whose coming was foretold hundreds of years ago. Ciri of Sintra, the Queen of the North. And from her blood will be born the Queen of the world. And Philippa wanted that queen to be entirely under the Lodge's control. Almost supervillainesque, she wanted to rule the world. Not too long after, while discussing Geralt and Ciri, more bickering broke out over the betrayal at Thanedd Isle, of course. Most insults specifically aimed at Yennefer, as Yennefer had just revealed that it was Tissaia de Vries who had ordered her to take Ciri to Thanedd Isle, Tissaia who was now dead. However, after Francesca tells the Lodge the story of the Elder Blood and Lara Doran, they return to the sobering fact that Ciri was supposedly in Nilfgaard under the Emperor's watchful eye. Philippa already suspected that this was not in fact Ciri, however, but a fake, and Asira confirmed this. They assumed that Emir might want the Queen of the World that was prophesied to be born in Nilfgaard. But they initially noted that only the sorcerers of Nilfgaard could have hatched that plan, as only they could know of the Elder Blood. The sorceresses deny it, of course, and they quickly realized that Vilgefortz had already shared the information of the prophecy with Emir, so both the Lodge and Emir want a child with Ciri to fulfill this prophecy. They also realized that this meant that Vilgefortz tricked the Emperor as well by sending him a fake Ciri. And while they assume that Vilgefortz might have Ciri, they also discuss the possibility that he does not, in fact, have her. They discuss the portal at Tor Lara, the Tower of the Gulls, which housed a powerful portal. Ida Emian notes that Ciri might have left Thanedd Isle through that portal, which we know she did, of course. Sabrina scoffs at this idea, however, as it requires magic at the 4th level to even view the portal. In order to activate the portal, you would require the abilities of an archmage. She doubted even Vilgefortz could do it, the most powerful mage alive, let alone Ciri. But, of course, as Sabrina doesn't put much stock in elven tales, She underestimates the Elder Blood severely. During the short break in these heated talks, Yennefer started looking for a way out once more. Triss came to talk to her, and Yennefer realized to her dismay that she had already fully invested herself in the lodge, and had there been no witnesses, she would have pleaded with Yennefer to help them find Ciri, as Triss realized that Yennefer was not exactly willing to become a loyal lodge member. After Triss left her alone, Yennefer distanced herself from the others. Quite frankly, no one made an effort to speak to her. Most of them hated her. However, Fringilla approached her. They exchanged veiled I hate yous by discussing the battle at Sodden Hill, which was attended by both Yennefer and Fringilla, of course, on opposite sides. Yennefer had apparently smashed a friend of Fringilla's to pieces during that battle. However, she also notes, veiled of course, that since practically the entire lodge hates both Yennefer and Fringilla, they have this opportunity to talk without interruptions. The Nilfgaardian sorceress then casually mentioned that, despite her efforts to conceal her thoughts, she knew Yennefer was planning an escape. This surprised Yennefer greatly, and then, again veiled of course, Fringilla brought up the blockade between Nilfgaard and the north, which made it oh so difficult to get good oysters in the south, alluding of course to the magical blockade around Monte Calvo, which prevented Yennefer from simply teleporting away. So Fringilla, veiled of course, advised Yennefer to, instead of simply creating a teleportation spell, teleport using a natural attractor. Say for example, the seawater in the oysters they were eating. Yennefer gladly took advantage of this veiled hint and teleported into the sea just off the coast of Skellige, where they generally catch oysters. The lodge of course was furious, but they agreed that Yennefer would likely not ruin their secret. She merely wanted to save Ciri, and with that, it was the end of that meeting. The next time we meet the lodge in any capacity is when Yennefer seeks to contact Triss. To talk, of course. Triss, however, neglects to tell Yennefer that she is accompanied by Philippa at the time, but Yennefer notices regardless. Triss was not a very good liar, and Yennefer knew her very well. Needless to say, that wasn't a great start to this conversation. Yennefer opens by telling Philippa that the secret of the lodge was safe with her. However, Philippa notes that as she fled Monte Calvo, she was now considered against the lodge. They were enemies. She noted, rightly, that Yennefer was attempting to block the lodge's plans. She did not want the lodge to use Ciri for their political purpose, of creating a grand northern kingdom, led in essence by magic. But Yennefer hadn't contacted Triss to bicker with Philippa for hours. She had wanted to ask Triss for a favor, but now Philippa spoke in her stead, of course. Yennefer asked that, should she die in her attempt to rescue Ciri, which she knew was very likely to happen given her dangerous plans, her reputation and good name were to be restored, that she would no longer be seen as a traitor and accomplice to Vilgefortz. Philippa denied her because, as she said, it was not in the interest of the lodge. If she died, she would die a traitor, which would make it easier to manipulate Ciri after the fact. Triss then interjected, asking Yennefer to leave something behind to put them on the right track to Ciri should Yennefer die. Meeting them halfway, Yennefer answered that she would leave them information if they would at least tell Geralt the truth of what happened. Again, Philippa denied the request, almost instantly, as that was also not in the interest of the lodge. Otherwise, Geralt might attempt to avenge Yennefer. If he despises her instead, he won't attempt to take revenge. She then mocked Yennefer further by telling her that Geralt was probably dead already anyway, or at least soon would be. In response, Yennefer asked a different favor again. She would give them all the information they needed if they saved Geralt. Again, Philippa denied her request. Because it is not in the interest of the lodge, Yennefer finished the sentence for her, and then turned to Triss, asking her what she thought of this lodge she joined now. The lodge who was so willing to throw away the lives of Ciri, whom Triss was like a big sister to, and Geralt, whom of course she loved. Philippa didn't allow Triss to answer, however. again interjecting, telling Yennefer that if she succeeds in saving Ciri, she'll only save the Lodge the trouble of doing it themselves. And Geralt? Who cares about Geralt? And after a silence, Triss asked Yennefer for forgiveness, which Yennefer this time denied. From the second meeting on, each sorceress of the Lodge went about their way discovering what they could about Ciri and her whereabouts. Fringilla took the route of seducing Geralt to see what he knew about Ciri's current location. However, either because Geralt lied to her or Fringilla's feelings for Geralt were strong enough for her to lie for him, the information wasn't quite right. The Lodge was informed by Fringilla that Vilgefortz hid in Castle Rissrun. That wasn't true, of course, and the Lodge was almost made to look a fool when they attacked the castle at night. Instead of Vilgefortz, they encountered nothing but cobwebs and were forced to lie to the mercenaries and novices they took along that it was all just an exercise. A classic case of your princess is in another castle. To save face further, they destroyed Rissrun entirely, and any stories pertaining to Rissrun were to be strictly monitored by the Lodge. Eventually, however, they found out that Vilgefortz was in fact hiding in Castle Stygia instead. It was too late to do anything though, as Geralt and his Hanse had already found the castle, saved Ciri and Yennefer, killed Vilgefortz, met the Emperor, and left. So Philippa entrusted Sabrina with the task to make up a legend that made the Lodge look good in regards to Castle Stygia, and of course Stygia was blown to pieces as well. In later records, it was said that the Sorceresses then orchestrated the Battle of Brenna and everything that happened to bring a swift conclusion to the war. However, as Philippa notes that their activities surrounding the war and the preparation of the peace negotiations were a failure, we can assume that was embellished at best. While they did attempt to influence the peace talks in many ways, the only one truly able to influence the kings to much success was Sabrina Glevissig, as she still had a direct link to Henselt. No doubt the Lodge had expected more out of these peace talks, in their favor of course. Not long after these peace talks concluded, the Lodge contacted Yennefer through a projection. They ordered Yennefer to bring Ciri to them, but Yennefer refused and told them they could not give orders to either her or Ciri. But Ciri then told her that she was not afraid of the Lodge, and if they wished, she would stand before them. They couldn't do anything anyway. So they agreed to meet on June 1st. Yennefer decided to go now instead as a show of good faith, but asked the Lodge to let Ciri stay with Geralt for a few days so he wouldn't be alone. And so Ciri followed on the 1st of June. During this final meeting, Philippa invited Ciri to sit at the start of the meeting. But when Yennefer tried to sit as well, Philippa forbade it and noted that Yennefer was not a guest, but was summoned to be tried and punished as a wrongdoer, and she would stand for as long as it takes the Lodge to decide her fate. Ciri, who before this moment was following protocol exactly, now broke said protocol and snapped that in that case she would stand too, as she had not come as a guest, but was summoned to decide her fate. She also noted that her and Yennefer's fate were linked together, and that would never change. With all due respect, she added. And so it was agreed that Yennefer could sit also. The Lodge soon noted that Ciri had the same biting wit as Yennefer. Philippa asked Ciri if she knew what they had planned for her, and without trying to hide her annoyance at the Sorceresses, Ciri noted that, of course she did. Vilgefortz was going to stick a glass tube between her legs, and she didn't expect much more from the Lodge, but she would have to respectfully decline. Sheila then responded icily with a barrage of, again veiled, insults towards Ciri, which came down to "you'll do as you're told or else." After her little speech, Philippa told Ciri that she would come with her to Kovir, to Pontvanis, the summer capital of the kingdom. She would no longer be Cirilla of Cintra. During the course of the audience, she would be presented as an adept of magic protected by the Lodge. At the audience, she would meet the king of Kovir, Estera Thyssen, his wife, Queen Zuleka, and their son and heir, Prince Tancred. She was to impress Tancred because the Lodge needed her to become his lover and give him a child. She couldn't do this as Cirilla of Cintra any longer because unfortunately Emhyr had now married the fake Ciri. and suddenly showing up with the real Ciri would ruin the current peace once more, which would be counterproductive to the Lodge's plans. So now, quite literally, they would teach Ciri how to most effectively seduce a man. That was to be her role, and eventually they would work her up to princess and later queen. But the most important thing was for Ciri to become pregnant with Tancred's child as fast as possible. Ciri was to feel honored to be a part of the Lodge's plans, because after giving birth she would be allowed to sit at the Lodge's table. They would teach her magic, which they must not have realized she no longer had at this point. Not to mention that as a child of the Elder Blood, her powers far exceeded that of any of the Lodge's members. Ciri then reminds Philippa that on the Isle of Thanedd, she had called Ciri a mindless tool, a monster. So Philippa suddenly calling Ciri one of theirs wasn't all too believable. But Francesca waved it away, saying they were all monsters in a way. Sheila deflected the issue by stating they would remove or disguise Ciri's scar. She would be a beautiful and mysterious woman, one Tancred would go crazy for. Clearly, the Lodge didn't think all too highly of Ciri, only using her as a tool to gain a child and entry to Kovir. And finally, they decided she could still be named Cirilla as long as she used a different last name. They were all eager to lend her their own name, of course, but to no one's surprise, she chose to be Cirilla of Vengerberg, after Yennefer. "Thank you, Lady Philippa," Ciri said after a few moments, squeezing the head of the Sphinxes in her hands. "I also feel honored with the proposal to take the surname de Tansaville. However, it seems to me that my new last name is the only thing that I can choose for myself. I thank the two mistresses, but I want to be called Cirilla of Vengerberg, daughter of Yennefer." At this point, the Lodge assumed that all would happen as they had just stated. But Ciri, of course, stated that no, it was not. She would need time to think on this, and then she would return with her answer later. She wanted to meet with Geralt first, alongside Yennefer, as she'd promised that to Geralt, and she would fulfill it with or without the Lodge's consent. She would attempt to convince Geralt that what the Lodge had in mind for her was so much different from what Vilgefortz had wanted, even though both had said it was for the good of the world. Sheila mocked her once more for her words and said she would soon learn how foolish she was, and she opposed Ciri's plans to meet with Geralt. So Philippa decided to vote on it, telling Ciri in the process that there would be no place for Geralt in her life from now on, and that she will also have to get rid of her sentimentality. However, after a stalemate, Philippa cast the final vote to let Ciri leave to meet with Geralt, and Ciri never returned to Monte Calvo. From this point on until The Witcher 1, quite a lot of time passes, of course. The Lodge has now lost Cirilla. They can't use her to bargain with Kovir any longer. They need a new plan. During The Witcher 1, we don't hear about the Lodge until we overhear Triss talking to another sorceress through a mirror. When asked, Triss doesn't want to talk about it. However, she tells us it's sorceress business. And to gain information on Salamandra, the main enemy in this game, she had to make some promises. Avoiding the question for the most part. From what we can tell, the sorceress Triss is speaking with is likely Kira Metz, as she looks blonde, and they also discuss Foltest's council, which both Triss and Kira are a part of. So, what is the Lodge up to that Geralt isn't allowed to know? Well, the Lodge is well aware at this point that Geralt has lost his memory, making him an excellent tool, but reminding him of what the Lodge truly was wouldn't make Geralt an all too eager little helper. And that's exactly what Triss turns him into for the duration of this story. It becomes apparent after some time that Geralt does know about the Lodge and the fact that Triss is a part of it. However, it seems Triss hasn't quite told Geralt everything, because he isn't bothered by this fact at all. Yet. Triss asks Geralt to complete certain tasks for her, and one of them is quite clearly ordered by the Lodge. Apparently, the Lodge and Luvarden, a merchant in town, both had the same plan, but the Lodge beat Luvarden to it, and this plan requires Geralt to help them. So Triss invites Geralt to join her at a banquet hosted by Luvarden, where Triss has a private conversation with the merchant, after which she approaches Geralt again and tells him that he should now talk to Luvarden. The merchant will make him an offer she thinks Geralt should accept. At this point, Geralt straight up asks Triss if she's using him, but she laughs it off. Luvarden offers Geralt help in finding Salamandra's main base if Geralt in turn brings him the documents he finds in Salamandra camps spread around nearby areas. So after doing exactly that, Geralt returns to Luvarden, who gives him a password to give to one of his men in the city. The password is this: "The lily has yet to be engulfed by fire, and it's answered by 3 lilies make 1. 3 lilies denoting Temeria, of course. And this tells us much about the intended goal of the Lodge and Luvarden. Engulfed by fire can only really point towards the Flaming Rose, the military branch of the Church of the Eternal Fire, non-human haters and fanatics. Through this password we can surmise that the Lodge and Luvarden both know that Salamandra is backed by the Flaming Rose, and that their ultimate goal is to undermine Foltest, thereby increasing their own power in Temeria, denoted by the lily. So, the Lodge's main goal is to stop the Flaming Rose and Salamandra from undermining Foltest. But why? Well, when ending the game with a neutral playthrough, we realize that the Lodge intended to use this uprising to gain power at Foltest's court. Foltest needs help in stopping the Flaming Rose, and the Lodge is all too willing to help. In return, however, Triss becomes Foltest's advisor, and sorceress influence grew substantially. If the Flaming Rose had gained power instead, they would have been much harder to manipulate, especially because they hate sorceresses. Sometime later, during the events of The Witcher 2, no matter what happened during Witcher 1, Triss is Foltest's advisor, so even if Geralt doesn't help the Lodge directly, they find a way in the end, perhaps through claiming that Geralt worked on their behalf to stop the uprising anyway. It won't be the last time they use The Witcher for their own gain. Now, in The Witcher 2, the Lodge's plans have changed substantially once again, or rather they reverted back to their original plans. The Lodge had decided that Triss was not to be trusted with their plans any longer, as she was too close to Geralt. And so, without her, they planned to assassinate Demavend of Aedirn, and Letho of Gullett, another Witcher, would be the assassin. They had decided that Demavend was a weak ruler and his son was equally weak. Now that they didn't have Ciri to marry into Kovir, they had to create their sorceress-ruled realm somewhere else. And they had chosen to start with Vergen in Aedirn. Philippa Eilhart had found the dragon Sessenthesis, also known as Saskia the Dragon Slayer, and decided to place her on the throne. But unbeknownst to the people around them, Philippa had found a way to mind control Saskia, placing a dragon under her control, a dragon they had now given a throne in Vergen, in Upper Aedirn. The Lodge, it seemed, held all the cards for a while. However, not all went as smoothly as they'd hoped. While Sheila de Tanzaville hung around in Flotsam to keep an eye on the Scoia'tael helping Letho, Triss started snooping around. Through her, we find out that, first of all, the Lodge wanted to stop Henselt from taking Upper Aedirn, not just because they intended to make it their own seat of power, but also because Henselt would become far too powerful. Secondly, the Lodge had lied to Henselt, telling him that Sheila could cure his infertility. This way, they'd have a sorceress at Henselt's court. Thirdly, Philippa has begun outright lying to Triss, feigning ignorance about Demavend's death. But fourthly, and most importantly, Triss realizes that Letho was working with the Lodge, or had been at least, and this comes back to haunt them in the worst way possible. Before the talks in Loch Muin, Asidova Anahit is teleported over to decompress Triss, who had been compressed and transported to Loch Muin by Nilfgaardian spies. And after decompressing Triss, Asira is immediately killed for her connection to the Lodge, because Nilfgaard now knows everything they need to know about the Lodge. You see, Letho of Gullett, while initially paid by the Lodge to kill Demavend, also went on to kill Foltest of Temeria, of course, and that was not ordered by the Lodge. Little did the sorceresses know, Letho was already on a quest to kill the Northern Kings. Even before they hired him, Letho was sent to the north by Emirva Emrys, the Emperor of Nilfgaard. His goal was to kill as many Northern Kings as he could to destabilize the north and ready the realm for the Nilfgaardian invasion. So the Lodge was in essence just helping Nilfgaard achieve their goal, and in doing so, Letho gained information on the Lodge which he, in turn, handed to Nilfgaard. And so, during the talks of Loch Muin, Letho is brought in to testify that the Lodge had hired him to kill both Demavend and Foltest. And even if you save Triss, because Philippa and Sheila didn't include her in their plans anymore, Triss also believes the Lodge ordered both kings killed, when in fact, they only wanted Demavend dead. In the aftermath of Loch Muin, mages are hated more than ever. Philippa loses her control dragon, and in the end Vergen as well, as it's overrun by Nilfgaard. Sabrina and Asira are dead, Triss is left in the dark, Sheila teleports to an unknown location, at least if Geralt is generous enough to allow it, otherwise she simply dies, and Philippa is blinded. When The Witcher 3 starts, things don't get much better. Sorcerers are prosecuted wherever they go, save for kingdoms like Kovir or Zerrikania. Sheila de Tansarville, if she survived the previous game, is captured and tortured to near death, and she dies by Geralt's or Yennefer's hand. Margarita and Fringilla are both captured as well, though freed in the end. Kira Metz, depending on your choices, can also die in the end. Francesca and Ida refuse to answer the summons when the Lodge is brought together again to aid in the fight against the Wild Hunt, and really the only reason the Lodge is willing to help, to begin with, is a promised amnesty by the Emperor of Nilfgaard. And of course, now that Ciri has returned, Philippa once again tries to recruit her for their cause. Ciri is not amused, even though Philippa is still convinced she'll have a place as Ciri's advisor when she becomes Empress of Nilfgaard someday. She even believes she can get Ciri to imprison Yennefer if she doesn't leave instead. I think we can safely say Philippa doesn't know Ciri very well at all. What exactly happens to the Lodge after the Wild Hunt is defeated is difficult to say. However, the Lodge was clearly well remembered in the future, as Nimue read about them in the Legend of Ciri. In those books, they were presented as legendary heroes. They were fiction, mostly. Aretuza was rebuilt in that time as well, and it held many, many pictures of the Lodge of Sorceresses. However, Nimue noted that most of these paintings of the Lodge, most of these grand images depicting the beautiful sorceresses, were propaganda. As we see during The Witcher 3 especially, the witch hunt had reached an all-time high. Nimue remembers that images of sorceresses were destroyed everywhere alongside the sorceresses themselves. After the events of The Witcher 3, we can only assume that the witch hunt stopped, one way or the other, as she tells us that for a long time, the pro-sorcerer propaganda was everywhere. The teachers at Aretuza and Ban Ard had to rebuild the appearance of respect, admiration, and reverent fear. The Lodge's sorceresses were now called Venerable Mother, great champions of the First Lodge. And after some time, the Lodge apparently reunited, and pictures and paintings recording those present at the table were of 10 wonderful and alluring women. However, as we know, the Lodge was cunning, and much like Avalach and the Aen Severn, the end justifies the means. It's unlikely that this reunion of the Lodge truly consisted of the original Lodge, for a few reasons of course. Not in the least the fact that Sheila, Sabrina and Asira were most definitely dead, as was Kira Metz in some cases. But it's likely the reunion happened after the elves had already left the realm as well. Francesca and Ida wouldn't be there either, and if they were, there's a good chance the elves would have destroyed the artwork before they left eventually. As Nimue states, no one knew if the Daisy of the Valley was really as beautiful as they say, nor do they know the appearance of Ida Emian. So, to add to the propaganda, they simply took some especially beautiful sorceresses and set them down at a table, pretending they were the Lodge, perhaps still joined by the true Lodge. But personally, I believe none of the original members deigned to join this farce in the first place. There were only 10 members pictured because Yennefer and Ciri were never truly a part of the Lodge, and the Lodge works in secret after all. On the propaganda paintings, the sorceresses were portrayed as dignified, noble, good, wise, honest and generous, and dazzlingly beautiful of course. But even Nimue and Kandri Ramurs knew that this depiction was probably a lie.